Alright, good day everyone. Today what we're going to do is we're going to commence the first part of the programming course. So what we're going to cover is Python programming, and this is something that I've been learning at university recently, and it's something that I think is really important. It's a very easy programming language to understand. It gives you a good grasp of programming concepts, especially object-oriented programming, and it'll allow you to create some pretty cool apps when you get into the more advanced things and you're using different modules and libraries. I've created a couple of programs using Python that are really useful for me. I have created a program, a task application using Python and tkinter, which is something that we'll go through later on. But there's plenty of things you can do with this programming language, and the possibilities are really endless. So I think it's important to understand. All right, so the first thing I should have explained as well is what I'm using here. I'm using a website called Replit, and what it is it's just a quick way to get onto any sort of it's an IDE, it's an online IDE, and you've got options here. Like, you don't just have to use Python. You can go through, you can use multiple different languages and practice on here. Now, is it the best platform to practice on? I think so. It doesn't involve downloading anything, so it's not going to take up any space on your computer, and it's very straightforward, and that's why I'm using it today. Later on I'll explain how to download things like PyCharm or other things like BB Edit, and then how to run these particular programs through a terminal window. But for now, this is probably the easiest way to start, and you won't be wasting any time. Alright, so as you can see here, we've got our main Python file here, and that's what we'll be running our code into. On the right hand side we have our console window, and if you're running it in BB Edit or any of those other programs, you would have your terminal window open where you could execute your program. In PyCharm you don't need that. The terminal window's at the bottom, which means that you just click the play button, kind of like we got here. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is go through the print statement. This is probably the most important built-in function within Python. So the print statement allows you to print things to the console window that's important. So for example, like I might want to state something for a user, so I might type in print, have my double quotation marks for my brackets, and then say hello, please follow the instructions below, and then I might so I run that, and as you can see, that's going to run in the console window. And the reason I might write something like this is just to sort of direct the user to read the instructions that I follow below, and then have user input and other functionality within the program. So the way we use print is we literally type in print. Now, anything with these brackets at the end of it is normally, well, it is a built-in function. Even when we go into creating our own functions in the future, that's how we'll execute them, with the brackets. So just remember that if you got these brackets here, you're normally referring to a function within the built-in functions for Python. So that's something that's important to remember. All right, so there's other ways you can use print. You can use a formatted string. You might ask, like, why would you want to do that? Well, in print we have data types that we want to handle. So for example, I might have a bunch of numbers which might be like this. I might have 1, 3, 4, and then I might want to say these are my numbers or something like that. Now, what I can do is I can try and plus these together and make this a string, a formatted string, but it's not going to work because these values here are being added as integers, and then this is over here is a string. So the way that we can do this is we can use a comma, and that'll run just like that. But another option that we have is using a formatted string. So what that means is that we make the whole line a string. Well, we don't make it a string when we print to the screen, but we can manipulate it so it comes out as a a single line without an error. We don't have to have the commas either now. So all the formatting really does is it just allows you to enter values that would normally cause type errors. Because you can't have, in Python, we can't have integers adding to strings or anything like that. So this allows us to do these sort of things. And look, right now, you're probably wondering why this might be important. And, we're going to go through it later and I'll explain. All right, so that's the first thing. So print statements are very straightforward. You just write print and then you can put in whatever you want with the quotation marks. You can use single or double. So the next thing I want to go through is probably one of the most, it is the most important thing. You're not going to make any program without it. It's called variables. Now, what are variables? They are containers that basically hold information. So for example, if I assign X, so in Python, this particular value here is an assignment key. Basically what that means is we're saying X is assigned to, and then we give it a particular value. So I might say X is assigned to 12 and Y is assigned to 11. Now these are variables. Why are they variables? Because they are basically two containers that are holding two different values. So the way a variable works without overcomplicating it is this points to the instance of a reference that references the number 12, and Y is the same. It points to an instance of a reference that references the number 11. And basically all you need to know is that when you are using X and assigning it to a particular value or A or B or whatever your variable name is called, that is basically the container that's holding that value. So now what we can do now is we can use our print statement that we just learned before, and we can say X and Y. And as you can see, we're printing on the screen over here those two values that are held within those particular variables. Now, as you can see, what I've done here is I've gone ahead and I have separated these values with a comma. So in the print statement, we have different things that we can do. So you can actually specify the separation. So right now, the separation, the default is a space, but we can separate it with something like a comma. So now the separation will be a comma, and you'll be able to see this on the screen. So 12 comma 11. We can also specify what happens at the end of our print statement by typing in end and then assigning it to something different. So we could say end, we want the end to have a exclamation mark or something like that. Run that, and as you can see, you put the exclamation mark on the end. Those are just little handy things you can do within the print statement. All right, so now some things I want to go through is just variable data types. So as you can see here, we've got 12 and 11. Now if I come down here and I assign A to a string and I say hello, and then I try and say A plus X, we're going to get an error. And the reason is because there's two different types. As you can see here, A is a string. What is a string? That is Unicode characters. So it's just, from any number or letter you can put in there, you can put in characters, you can put in anything you want, and it'll accept it, right? But it's not accepting these particular numbers here as integers like they are up here. It's just accepting it as a string. So that means that, even if I come here and I type in 11, it would make sense that 11 plus 12 should work. However, it's not going to happen because this is a string. It's a different data type to the X variable up here. So what we can do is we can cast this value to something different. So this is sort of going into casting now, and we can do that by typing in here that we want it to be an integer. And what that'll do is that'll allow us to add these two values together and get the output of 23. So casting is another thing that you'll learn, and it's actually pretty important to learn. And the way that you do that is you just specify the value here, and you'll get used to it very quickly. The main ones that you'll use is the integers and the floats. So that's like this, a float. So what is an integer? An integer is a whole number, represented a whole number. So anything from, 1, 100, 200, 300, it's a whole number. A float is a floating point number. So you've got the decimal place at the end. So if you can remember back when you're in high school and you did, you weren't using whole numbers anymore, you're using remainders and decimals. That's what floats are. So floats are like numbers like this, like 12.00 or 12.99. Now, even though a float and an integer has a different value, right? So I've just said here, let's have y assigned to an int of x, which y will then be 12 because it's going to get rid of this remainder here and give it a whole number. Even though y is an integer now, and this is a float, we can still add these two together. It still allows us to do that. Now, Python is smart enough to allow this to happen, which is excellent because it means that it makes programming a lot easier for us. So as you can see here, y equals 12 and y plus x equals 24.999002, whatever. So it's just giving us that value here. So now if I go x and y just here, as you can see, we've got the 12 and the 12.99. Okay, so now that we know what variables are, let's start by creating our first small program. So let's say something very simple. Let's assign a variable. So what I want is, I'll say, let's assign two variables, one a string, one a whole number, and print this to the user. So what we could say is we'll add in our string and we'll call it a, and we can just assign that to something simple. So we could say my favorite number is, and then b can be, let's go the number 12. That's not my favorite number, but let's just go for 12 for now. So now, thinking back to the stuff that we've gone through, how might we print this? And, Replic's amazing. It's going to give me the answer already. So I'm going to separate it with a comma, meaning that I'm not adding these values together. I'm separating them. And then I am going to run that, and it's going to be printed to the screen. My favorite number is 12. Now, this is not the only way that you can do that. You can also do it like this, like as I said before, with a formatted string. You can go here, and you can go, see, we could go, my favorite number is, and then put the variable there, b, which is going to give us the same value instead of creating this extra variable, which isn't bad. Like, it's not a bad way to do it as well. We can also go print, and we could do casting. So we could say, we could go a, and then we could plus, and then cast b as a string, so it's the same value as a, and that would allow us to print that as well. So as you can see, all these are printed the same. So just remember, in Python, there's 100 ways to skin a cat. It's very very versatile, and there's so many ways to do the same thing or achieve the same thing. So if you're coding and you're doing something different to other people, and your code's a bit longer, a bit shorter, don't worry about it. As long as it's achieving the same task or objective that you're trying to achieve, it's perfectly fine. All right. So now let's talk about user input. So user input is something that, that's the whole reason of, I guess, learning coding, so that we can get user input and then have some sort of output. So let's talk about it. So the way that we do import is we will generally assign, we will assign the user's input to a variable, and we'll store that information, because if we're not storing it, then what's the point of asking for that information? So we could say here user input. We'll put that as our variable now, and then we're assigning that to the input that the user puts in. As you can see here, Replic's already done it for me. It's putting the input function here, the built-in function in Python, and then all I'm doing in here is I'm using my double quotation marks, and I'm just writing in here what I want the user to see. So they're going to see enter a number. Then all I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go ahead and print this value, just to show you that the variable is stored from what the user inputs. So the user is going to type in, I don't know, let's go 11, and as you can see, 11 stored in there. So we might say say that we want a input as a integer instead of a string. So the default when you use input like this is a string. So if I, even though it's saying this number is 11, if I go plus 11, we're going to get an error here. As you can see, it says here that you can only concatenate string, not integer string. So this value here is being stored as a string. So anytime you use input, you got to remember to cast the value either straight away, so up here you can cast the value, or when you're using it elsewhere. And that's why we talked about casting before. So normally what I like to do is I like to get the user input like this as a string, and then cast it later on. Some people don't prefer that, but the reason I prefer that is because some users will type in random things. Like if they might type in something like, enter a number, and they could go something like my number is 12. Okay. Now, if we cast this as a float or an integer, this is going to throw us an error, and they're not going to be able to enter that. So plenty of users will input different information or different types of inputs that you won't be ready for. Now, if you have it as a string, you can accept the value, and then what you can do later on is say, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to split that string up into the values that I want, which is 12, and then I'm going to use that value later on. So that way it doesn't matter what users are inputting, as long as they're inputting something, you can still get out what you want out of that particular string. Okay. So anyway, what I'll do is I'll cast this here. So I'll cast this as an integer, just as we went through before, and then that will solve the problem there, and then we'll run that, and here we go. Bang, 22. Awesome. All right, so that's pretty much our first lesson. It's very basic. In the next lesson, what we'll do is we'll start going through getting user input. We'll do it for something specific. Maybe we'll make a small calculator, or something useful. We might concatenate a string, which means adding the user's input to a particular string to make a story or something like that. And then we'll go from there. But this is the first lesson. I hope you've enjoyed it. Get on this REPL. It's so great. Like, you can come in here and practice what we've just gone through, making a bunch of different variables and printing it to the screen. And Replic's going to help you along the way. Anytime you type in something and it prompts you, what you might want, click tab and it'll go along. So yeah, feel free to play around with this. And what I'll do is I'll create the next video. We'll go through some more content, and we'll keep learning.